Before the continent had a name, before kingdoms raised banners, before roads were carved into forests, and long before humans learned to fear monsters, the world of the Witcher was already old. So old, in fact, that even the elves who now call themselves ancient arrived after its first great age had already faded. In those earliest centuries, the land that would later be known as the continent did not yet belong to any single people. It was a layered world, shaped by successive civilizations, each one rising, reshaping reality, and then quietly disappearing, leaving only fragments behind. Stone foundations buried under newer cities, symbols carved into rocks no one remembers how to read, magical scars in the land itself. Tonight, we begin at the very beginning, not with heroes, but with systems, with how this world truly worked long before swords and sorcery became common tools of survival. The first law of this world: magic is not human. In the Witcher world, magic is not a gift created for humans, nor something shaped by belief. It is a force of nature, as real and dangerous as gravity or fire. Long before the arrival of humans, magic already flowed through the world in invisible currents, later known as chaos. Chaos is not good or evil. It is raw potential, unstable, overwhelming, and lethal to those who do not understand it. This is why early civilizations rose and fell, not because of war, but because of control. The first peoples to thrive were those who learned how to shape chaos without being consumed by it. The builders before the elves. Almost nothing remains of the very first civilization. No living descendants, no written language preserved, only structures. Across the continent, in caves, mountains, and deep underground, there are ruins that do not match elven or dwarven architecture. Stones fused together without mortar. Perfectly symmetrical chambers carved with inhuman precision. Walls etched with symbols that react faintly to magic even thousands of years later. These beings are sometimes called the precursors, though no single name survives. What matters is not who they were, but how they lived. They understood chaos instinctively, not as something to dominate, but something to redirect. Their cities were built along natural magical ley lines, channels where chaos flowed more gently. Their structures did not resist magic, they cooperated with it. This is why some ruins still hum quietly at night. A world without kingdoms. There were no kings in this age. Power was not inherited, but understood. Leadership belonged to those who could sense the world's rhythms, changes in magic, shifts in climate, movements of creatures that no longer exist. Instead of borders, there were zones of influence, shaped by geography and magic together. Forests where magic pooled were left untouched. Mountains rich in mineral and magical resonance became centers of craftsmanship and study. Conflict was rare, not because these beings were peaceful, but because warfare against magic-aware civilizations was inefficient. A city built in harmony with chaos could not easily be destroyed without destabilizing the land itself. In this era, civilization was less about conquest and more about balance. Why they fell. The fall did not come from invasion, It came from curiosity. Over time, the precursors began experimenting, not with chaos itself, but with separation. They tried to isolate magic, store it, even bend it into stable forms that could be transferred. This was the first step towards something the modern world would later call sorcery, and it was dangerous. By trying to confine chaos, they disrupted the natural flow they once respected. Magical currents began to fracture. Localized disasters followed. Lands where reality warped, creatures twisted into unstable forms, and entire regions rendered uninhabitable. Eventually, the civilization collapsed inward, undone by its own mastery. They did not vanish in fire or blood. They simply stopped. What they left behind. Though their cities fell silent, their influence did not disappear. Their ruins became anchors for future magic. Their experiments weakened the barriers between worlds, and most importantly, they left the land prepared for what came next. Because the world, once shaped, does not forget. It waits. And soon, others would arrive, beings who would inherit a world already scarred, already powerful, and already dangerous. The elves. When the Seeds still remembered the stars. When the elves first arrived, the world did not greet them with hostility. It received them like a deep forest receives fog, quietly, patiently, without resistance. The elves who would later be called Seed, the people of the hills, did not come as conquerors. They came as travelers who had already lost a home elsewhere. Their arrival was not sudden nor violent. It unfolded slowly across generations through places where the boundaries between worlds were already thin. This detail matters because in the Witcher world, movement between worlds is not random. It follows pressure, weakness, and imbalance. The earlier civilizations had already strained reality itself. The elves merely followed the quiet cracks that already existed. Across the continent, in caves, mountains, and deep underground, there are ruins that do not match elven or dwarven architecture. Stones fused together without mortar, perfectly symmetrical chambers carved with inhuman precision. Walls etched with symbols that react faintly to magic even thousands of years later. These beings are sometimes called the precursors, though no single name survives. What matters is not who they were, but how they lived. They understood chaos instinctively, not as something to dominate, but something to redirect. Their cities were built along natural magical ley lines, channels where chaos flowed more gently. Their structures did not resist magic, they cooperated with it. This is why some ruins still hum quietly at night. A world without kingdoms. There were no kings in this age. Power was not inherited, but understood. Leadership belonged to those who could sense the world's rhythms, changes in magic, shifts in climate, movements of creatures that no longer exist. Instead of borders, there were zones of influence, shaped by geography and magic together. Forests where magic pooled were left untouched. Mountains rich in mineral and magical resonance became centers of craftsmanship and study. Conflict was rare, not because these beings were peaceful, but because warfare against magic-aware civilizations was inefficient. A city built in harmony with chaos could not easily be destroyed without destabilizing the land itself. In this era, civilization was less about conquest and more about balance. Why they fell. The fall did not come from invasion. It came from curiosity. Over time, the precursors began experimenting, not with chaos itself, but with separation. They tried to isolate magic, store it, even bend it into stable forms that could be transferred. This was the first step towards something the modern world would later call sorcery. And it was dangerous. By trying to confine chaos, they disrupted the natural flow they once respected. Magical currents began to fracture. Localized disasters followed. Lands where reality warped, creatures twisted into unstable forms, and entire regions rendered uninhabitable. Eventually, the civilization collapsed inward, undone by its own mastery. They did not vanish in fire or blood. They simply stopped. What they left behind. Though their cities fell silent, their influence did not disappear. Their ruins became anchors for future magic. Their experiments weakened the barriers between worlds, and most importantly, they left the land prepared for what came next. Because the world, once shaped, does not forget. It waits. And soon, others would arrive, beings who would inherit a world already scarred, already powerful, and already dangerous. The elves. When the Seed still remembered the stars. When the elves first arrived, the world did not greet them with hostility. It received them like a deep forest receives fog, quietly, patiently, without resistance. The elves who would later be called Seed, the people of the hills, did not come as conquerors. They came as travelers who had already lost a home elsewhere. Their arrival was not sudden nor violent. It unfolded slowly across generations through places where the boundaries between worlds were already thin. This detail matters because in the Witcher world, movement between worlds is not random. It follows pressure, weakness, and imbalance. The earlier civilizations had already strained reality itself. The elves merely followed the quiet cracks that already existed. How elven magic truly worked. Unlike later human sorcerers, elves did not try to command chaos. They listened to it. Elven magic was not built on formulas or forced extraction. It was based on attunement. An elf mage did not draw power inward aggressively. Instead, they aligned themselves with the flow of chaos already present in the land. This is why elven magic was slower, subtler, and far more stable. An elven spell might take days to prepare. It might require moonlight, silence, or specific seasons, but once woven, it endured. Forests altered by elven magic stayed changed for centuries. Roads shaped by elven hands never eroded the same way human roads did. Magic, for elves, was not a tool. It was a relationship. Cities that grew instead of being built. Early elven cities did not rise upward in stone and towers. They unfolded outward like living things. Homes were grown from shaped trees. Walkways followed natural slopes rather than flattening them. Light was guided through leaves and crystal rather than forced through glass. Even their underground spaces breathed, designed to circulate air and magic together. This architecture was not aesthetic preference, it was survival. Elves understood that the land remembers violence. A mountain split unnaturally becomes unstable. A forest cut too deeply resists regrowth. Magic reacts the same way. Brutal alterations cause long-term consequences. By building gently, the elves avoided awakening the scars left by the precursors. For a time, they thrived. The first elven political order. Elven society did not revolve around kings in the human sense. Leadership belonged to circles, not thrones. These circles were formed by elders, mages, historians, and wardens of specific lands. Authority was tied to responsibility. Those who governed a forest were bound to protect it. Those who guided magical practice were forbidden from personal gain. Decisions were slow. Debates lasted seasons, but once a choice was made, it was rarely questioned. This system created stability, but also fragility, because it relied on memory. And memory, even among elves, can fade. The turning point, time begins to press. The elves lived long lives, so long that urgency felt unnecessary. But the world itself was changing. Magic flows slowly weakened. Some ley lines shifted, others vanished entirely. The balance left behind by the precursors was finally collapsing under its own age. This was when the elves made a mistake that would echo for millennia. They began to preserve instead of adapt. Rather than reshaping themselves to a changing world, they attempted to lock reality into a remembered perfection. Spells were woven to keep forests eternally green. Cities were stabilized unnaturally. Time itself was resisted. In the Witcher world, resisting time is always dangerous, because time is not passive. It pushes back. The arrival of others. As elven society turned inward, focused on preservation, they failed to notice something crucial. The cracks between worlds were widening again, not violently, quietly. And through them, new beings would arrive, short-lived, adaptable, unburdened by memory. Humans. They would not understand the systems the elves had carefully built. They would not feel the land's warnings, but they would change the world faster than anyone before them. And for the elves, time would finally stop being a distant concept. It would become an enemy. The quiet collision of longevity and urgency. Humans did not arrive as an army. They arrived as families, small groups at first, stepping through weakened boundaries between worlds, settling near rivers, forests, and ruins they did not understand. They brought no grand magic, no ancient memory, and no sense of patience shaped by centuries. What they brought instead was urgency. In the Witcher world, lifespan defines behavior. Humans, aware that their time was brief, shaped the land quickly. They cut forests rather than guiding them. They raised stone walls instead of living shelters. They took magic and asked what it could do now, not what it would become later. To the elves, this felt violent. To humans, it felt necessary. Why humans mastered magic differently? Humans could not attune to chaos the way elves did. Their bodies were not built for it. Instead, they learned extraction. Human magic works by pulling chaos inward, shaping it through will, and releasing it before it destroys the caster. This is why human mages require intense training, emotional control, and physical sacrifice. Chaos resists confinement. It burns, scars, and shortens lives. This system created power quickly, but at a cost. Where elven magic altered landscapes slowly, human sorcery changed cities in years. Towers rose, fortifications hardened, magical experiments accelerated beyond stability. The land began to strain again. The first human kingdoms. Human political order was simple compared to elven circles. Protection in exchange for loyalty. Kings rose where sorcerers and soldiers aligned. Borders formed where roads could be defended. Authority passed through bloodlines rather than memory. This system was inefficient in wisdom, but effective in expansion. Humans multiplied rapidly. Settlements spread along trade routes, swallowing old elven paths and ancient ruins alike. Where elves hesitated to disturb certain regions, humans saw opportunity. And opportunity does not wait. The Elven Retreat. Contrary to later legends, the elves did not lose the world through war alone. They lost it through hesitation. Bound by slow decision-making and reverence for the past, elven leadership failed to respond decisively. Some circles argued for coexistence, others demanded isolation. A few warned that conflict was inevitable. By the time consensus formed, the world had already changed. Forests once stabilized by elven magic began to fragment. Ley lines shifted under human construction. Places once sacred became crossroads. The elves withdrew, not in defeat, but in mourning. Ruins as memory. As elven cities emptied, they were not destroyed, they were abandoned. And abandonment is its own kind of decay. Without constant attunement, elven magic unraveled slowly. Trees reclaimed structures grown into their roots, light-guiding crystals dimmed, roads warped back into hillsides. To humans, these places became legends. To monsters, they became homes. Because in the Witcher world, monsters are not random. They emerge where magic stagnates, fractures, or is left unattended. Abandoned elven cities became breeding grounds for creatures shaped by lingering spells with no guiding will. Civilizations do not simply vanish here, they transform into danger. What remained unspoken? By the time humans realized what they had inherited, it was too late to undo it. They had built kingdoms on layered ruins. They had awakened forces they did not fully understand. And beneath their cities lay civilizations that had already failed for similar reasons: curiosity, control, and speed. The elves remembered this, and it hardened them, not into conquerors, but into survivors. The stone below and the civilizations that endured. While the surface world argued, burned, and rebuilt itself again and again, another story unfolded beneath it. A slower story, one carved into stone rather than written in memory. The dwarves did not arrive through broken worlds or fading portals. They were already here, deep, patient, and largely unseen by those above. Their civilizations did not rise and fall in visible arcs. They endured, quietly reshaping the world from below while others fought over what lay on the surface. To understand the lost civilizations of this world, one must look downward. The dwarven understanding of power. Dwarves did not trust chaos. They respected it, but they never relied on it. Instead, their civilization was built on material mastery: stone, metal, pressure, and time. Where elves listened to magic and humans extracted it, dwarves avoided direct contact whenever possible. Their strength came from systems, not spells. Dwarven engineering worked because it accepted the limits of the world. Tunnels followed stress lines in rock. Cities were placed where stone naturally supported weight. Ventilation shafts aligned with geothermal flows. Even light was designed to travel efficiently, reflected and redirected through mineral surfaces. This is why so many dwarven structures still stand. They were not sustained by magic, they were sustained by reality. Underground kingdoms without borders. Dwarven civilization did not divide itself by surface geography. Mountains were not obstacles, they were entrances. Kingdoms expanded horizontally through connected tunnel networks rather than outward across land. Trade flowed underground. Information traveled through carved routes marked with runic stone language that could be read even in darkness. Political authority rested with guilds, not crowns. A master smith held more power than a noble by birth. Knowledge of stone, metallurgy, or engineering determined status. Leadership was practical, not symbolic. This created stability, but also rigidity. Change came slowly underground, sometimes too slowly. The cost of isolation. As humans spread and elves withdrew, dwarves largely remained below, confident that surface conflicts would burn themselves out. They underestimated one thing: monsters. Many creatures born of magical instability did not remain above ground. Some adapted to darkness, others were drawn to the warmth and resonance of dwarven forges. Over time, abandoned elven ruins funneled corrupted magic downward, seeping into ancient tunnels. Dwarven defenses were strong, but not infinite. Entire underground cities were sealed off rather than lost. Tunnels collapsed intentionally, kingdoms fractured into isolated holds, each choosing survival over expansion. This is why modern maps are incomplete. The world beneath is broken, but not empty. How lost civilizations support the present. Even now, the surface world rests on forgotten foundations. Human cities unknowingly draw water through ancient dwarven channels. Roads follow the stable ground left behind by precursors. Monster nests form where elven magic once stabilized forests and now lies dormant. Nothing in the Witcher world is accidental. Every ruin supports something else. Every lost civilization leaves behind systems that continue to function imperfectly, silently, and often dangerously. The past is not gone. It is structural. A world built on layers. By the time Witchers would later walk these lands, trained to fight the monsters born of imbalance, the world had already been shaped by countless choices made long before their time. Choices to preserve, choices to control, choices to ignore. Civilizations here do not end, they sink, and what sinks does not disappear, it waits. When the world broke open, there came a moment when all the buried tensions, all the strained systems finally failed at once. It was not a war, it was not a decision, it was an event. Later scholars would call it the conjunction of the spheres, but names came much later. At the time, it felt like the world itself had lost control of its own boundaries. What the conjunction truly was. The conjunction was not a single instant, it was a process. As earlier civilizations weakened the natural flow of magic, and as elves preserved what should have changed, and as humans accelerated forces they did not fully understand, the barriers separating worlds grew thin. Then they tore. For a time, multiple realities overlapped. Creatures fell into the world not because they were summoned, but because there was suddenly space for them. Physics bent, magic surged, entire ecosystems collided. This is why monsters in this world are not unified. Some obey magical laws, some follow biological rules, some exist in ways that defy both. They are not evil by nature, they are displaced. Why monsters remain? In many worlds, monsters fade when the disaster ends. In this one, they stayed, because the conjunction did not fully heal. The land was already fractured by lost civilizations. Ley lines were unstable. Ruins acted as anchors for lingering magical pressure. The world could not seal itself properly. So monsters found niches.
Swamps where magic pooled gave birth to necrophages. Forests once stabilized by elven spells became hunting grounds for spectral beings. Underground passages opened paths for creatures adapted to darkness and heat. Monsters here are symptoms, not invaders. They reveal where the world remains broken. The human response: control through creation. Humans responded the only way they knew how. They engineered a solution. Instead of restoring balance, they chose to manage the consequences. This is how Witchers were born, not as heroes, but as tools. The Witcher system explained. The creation of Witchers was not mystical destiny, it was applied experimentation. Young boys were subjected to alchemical trials designed to force adaptation, enhancing reflexes, sight, resistance to toxins, and tolerance for chaos. Many died. Those who survived became something no civilization had created before, a being shaped specifically to exist between systems. Witchers are not fully human, but they are not monsters either. They are stabilizers. Their signs are simplified magic, designed to work quickly and reliably, not beautifully. Their potions exploit altered physiology rather than raw chaos. Their training teaches pattern recognition, not glory. They exist because the world cannot return to balance, only to containment.
Why the world can never fully heal. Every lost civilization left behind structures that still function. Every magical scar continues to influence its surroundings. Removing monsters without addressing these foundations is temporary relief. New ones will form, old ones will return. This is why Witchers wander endlessly. There is no final victory. Only maintenance, only survival. The quiet truth beneath the legends. When bards sing of heroes and kings, they rarely mention the civilizations beneath their feet. But those civilizations are the reason heroes are needed at all. The Witcher world is not cruel by choice, it is exhausted, layered with unfinished histories, still carrying the weight of everything that came before. Echoes that refuse to fade. Long after the conjunction, long after the rise of kingdoms and the standardization of borders, the world settled into something that resembled stability. But it was never peace, it was fatigue. The land learned to endure its own wounds, and those who lived upon it learned to live around them. Memory as a force in the Witcher world. In this world, memory is not abstract, it is environmental. Places remember what happened within them, not symbolically, but functionally. Magic leaves residue. Trauma alters flows of chaos. Repeated violence reshapes the way reality behaves in specific locations. This is why some battlefields birth wraiths generations later, why abandoned keeps attract curses, why forests once guarded by elves feel hostile rather than wild. Memory here becomes behavior. Lost civilizations do not vanish because their systems remain embedded in the land's responses. Why ruins are never empty. A ruin is not just stone without purpose, it is a machine without supervision. Elven cities still guide light in unnatural ways. Dwarven tunnels still redirect water and heat. Precursor structures still interfere with magical currents. When these systems operate without caretakers, they create anomalies. Strange creatures adapt to them. Sorcerers feel drawn to them.
Travelers feel unease without understanding why. The Witcher world does not generate mystery intentionally, it leaks it. The subtle decline of knowledge. Each civilization understood only part of the whole. The precursors understood balance, but not restraint. The elves understood harmony, but not change. The dwarves understood structure, but not adaptation. Humans understood speed, but not consequence. No one ever understood everything at once. As centuries passed, knowledge fragmented further. Human mages studied magic without fully grasping its ecological cost. Kings ruled land without knowing what lay beneath it. Witchers learned patterns without being taught origins. This is why the world feels permanently incomplete. It is missing its own instruction manual. The role of melancholy. Melancholy in this world is not emotional weakness. It is awareness. Those who sense the layers beneath their feet, elves, some mages, older witchers, understand that they are living in the aftermath of greatness, not the dawn of it. Progress here does not feel forward, it feels compensatory. Every solution addresses a problem that should never have existed. Every victory feels temporary. And yet, life continues. Why civilization still tries. Despite everything, people still build. They raise towns atop ruins. They repair roads laid over broken ley lines. They tell stories to give meaning to survival. This is not ignorance. It is resilience. Civilizations in the Witcher world do not persist because they believe the world can be perfected. They persist because living among ruins is still living, and living, even imperfectly, matters. The quiet agreement of the world. There is an unspoken rule in this land. The past will not release its grip. The future will not arrive cleanly, so the present must learn to hold both. This is why the world produces witchers instead of saviors, why it creates caretakers instead of redeemers, why it rewards endurance more than ambition. The lost civilizations are not warnings, they are instructions written too late. Living among the inheritance of ruin. For those born into this world, the past is not a story they learn. It is a condition they inherit. A farmer plows fields enriched by ancient magic without knowing why the soil never freezes. A village builds its chapel atop stone that hums faintly at night. A road bends where no obstacle remains, following the long collapsed outline of an elven causeway. People do not feel surrounded by history. They feel surrounded by normality shaped by invisible hands.
Belonging in a world that was never meant for you. Humans, more than any other people, live with a quiet contradiction. They rule the surface, but the surface was never built for them. Their kingdoms stand atop foundations designed by others for purposes long forgotten. This creates a subtle tension in daily life, a sense that stability must constantly be defended, repaired, justified. This is why human culture leans toward law, religion, and authority. Not because humans crave control, but because they live in a world that feels perpetually unstable beneath their feet. Elves as living remnants. Elves do not see themselves as a fading people. They see themselves as witnesses.
Every forest cleared feels like a sentence rewritten incorrectly. Every ruined elven structure repurposed by humans feels like a memory misquoted. Their bitterness is not rooted only in loss, but in accuracy. They remember how the world once worked, and remembering without the power to restore is its own form of exile. This is why elven sorrow feels colder than rage. It is grief sharpened by clarity. Dwarves and the weight of continuity. Dwarves endure because endurance is built into their culture. They do not mourn the surface world's chaos because they expect it. Stone collapses eventually. Tunnels fail. Holds fall silent. These outcomes are accounted for. What unsettles dwarves is not loss, but carelessness. Seeing ancient systems misused or ignored violates their understanding of responsibility. To a dwarf, a ruin is not romantic, it is unfinished work. Witchers as proof of acceptance. Witchers exist because the world has accepted that it cannot be made whole. They are living acknowledgments of failure and of wisdom gained too late. Their mutations strip them of illusion. Their neutrality is not moral detachment, but functional necessity. Choosing sides in a world this layered only worsens imbalance. A witcher does not fight monsters because he hates them. He fights because someone must, and because no one else can do it without making things worse. The meaning of survival here. In many worlds, survival is resistance. Here, survival is cooperation with damage. People learn where not to build, which woods to avoid at dusk, which ruins to leave undisturbed. Superstition becomes folk science. Legends become safety manuals. This is not ignorance, it is adaptation. Life continues not by fixing the past, but by learning how to walk around it without waking it.
A world that teaches quietly. The Witcher world does not punish curiosity immediately. It allows mistakes, but it remembers them. Civilizations rose believing they could understand everything. Those who came later learned something smaller, but more durable. You do not need to master the world. You need to listen to where it hurts. Companions made of stone and silence. As time stretches onward, something subtle begins to happen. The lost civilizations stop feeling distant. They stop feeling tragic. They become familiar. People learn the moods of ruins the way sailors learn currents. A collapsed tower becomes a landmark rather than a warning. An old elven glade becomes a place to pass through quietly, without stopping. A sealed dwarven gate becomes part of the mountain's face, neither open nor closed, simply there. This is how the world teaches coexistence. How the past integrates into daily life. No one consciously decides to live among remnants. They simply grow up doing so. Children play near stones etched with symbols no one can read. Shepherds avoid certain valleys without knowing why their grandfathers did the same. Inns are built where the ground feels right, often above buried foundations laid by hands long gone. This is not nostalgia, it is calibration. The world subtly guides behavior, and those who listen survive longer. Magic as a background condition. By this age, magic is no longer seen as wonder, it is weather. Most people will never cast a spell, just as most people will never command a storm. Yet they live with its effects constantly. Crops grow differently in certain soils.
Illness behaves strangely near old sites. Dreams feel heavier in places where reality once thinned. This is why fear of magic never fully disappears. It is not fear of power, it is fear of unpredictability inherited from the past. Why restoration is no longer the goal. Some mages still speak of healing the world. They search ancient texts, they study ruins, they attempt to stabilize ley lines permanently. But the older scholars know better. Stability here is temporary by nature. Restoring one layer often destabilizes another. Sealing magic too tightly causes pressure elsewhere. Destroying ruins removes structural support the land has come to rely on. The world has adapted to its own damage. Interfering too deeply risks reopening old wounds. So most choose restraint. Civilizations as teachers, not models. The lost civilizations are no longer examples to emulate. They are lessons to observe. From the precursors, balance without humility fails. From the elves, harmony without change stagnates. From the dwarves, structure without flexibility fractures. From humans, speed without foresight multiplies consequences. No single path was wrong, each was incomplete. This understanding shapes modern thought even when it is not spoken aloud. The gentle weight of continuity. What remains is not despair, it is continuity. Life persists not because the world improves, but because it adapts its expectations. Grandeur gives way to maintenance. Legacy gives way to stewardship. Survival becomes a shared, quiet agreement between land and people. The world no longer asks to be mastered, only respected. A long night, still worth walking. The Witcher world is often described as harsh, but harshness implies cruelty. This world is not cruel, it is tired. And tired things do not need heroes shouting promises. They need caretakers who understand limits, who know when to act and when to leave something untouched. The lost civilizations do not demand remembrance, they offer companionship. Stone beside road, forest beside ruin, silence beside life. Why endurance is the world's final language. There is a moment, if one listens long enough to this world, when the noise fades. Not silence, but clarity. It comes at night, when fires burn low and ruins cast long, gentle shadows, when monsters retreat into patterns as predictable as tides, when roads feel older than the travelers walking them. In that moment, the lost civilizations stop feeling like tragedies, they feel like layers of intention. Endurance as a system, not a virtue. Endurance in this world is not moral strength, it is structural design. The land does not survive because it is strong, but because it learned how to distribute damage. No single civilization was allowed to bear the full weight of existence forever. Each took its turn shaping the world, then stepped aside, willingly or not. What remains is a composite system. Ruins absorb magical overflow. Forests regulate unstable regions. Witchers manage biological consequences. Kingdoms provide temporary order. Nothing here is meant to last untouched. Everything is meant to last together. Why this world still produces stories. Stories persist because explanation alone is insufficient. people tell legends not to glorify the past, but to compress it into something survivable. A monster becomes a tale. A ruin becomes a warning. A failed civilization becomes a proverb told by a hearth. This is how memory becomes manageable. Too much truth at once would paralyze, so the world teaches in fragments. Belonging without ownership. No one truly owns land here. They borrow it. A farmer borrows a field stabilized by ancient stone. A king borrows authority maintained by fragile systems he did not create. Even elves borrow forests shaped by magic that no longer answers them fully. Ownership implies permanence. This world only allows stewardship. Those who accept this live longer. Those who resist it leave ruins behind. The quiet role of acceptance. Acceptance in the Witcher world is not surrender. It is accuracy. Knowing which battles cannot be won saves lives. Knowing which wounds should not be reopened prevents catastrophe. Knowing when to walk away preserves balance. This is why the wisest characters are rarely the loudest. They speak softly because they are listening. Why the world endures at all. The lost civilizations did not fail because they were wrong. They failed because they tried to finish something that could only continue. The world was never meant to reach a perfect state. It was meant to remain inhabitable. And it does, not through triumph, but through restraint, not through restoration, but through care. A world still worth the firelight. At the end of the day, people still gather. They eat, they rest, they tell stories. Children grow up playing near ruins and do not feel afraid. Travelers sleep beside old stones and wake unharmed. Life finds pockets of warmth even in places shaped by catastrophe. This is not optimism, it is proof. The world that learned to breathe slowly. There is a rhythm to this world that reveals itself only over time, not the rhythm of battles or politics, but the slower pulse beneath them, the one that continues long after banners rot and names fade. It is the rhythm of stones settling, forests reclaiming space, magic redistributing itself like water finding new paths. This rhythm is what keeps the world alive. How time behaves differently here. Time in the Witcher world does not erase, it layers. Events do not disappear into the past, they sink into it. Each century presses gently upon the previous one, compressing memory into structure. This is why history feels heavy here, not distant. Old roads remain useful because they were laid with care. Ancient boundaries still influence politics because terrain remembers them. Even hatred lingers longer because it was fed by centuries of loss. Time does not heal wounds. It teaches the world how to live with them.
The difference between collapse and completion. From a distance, the rise and fall of civilizations looks like failure, but from within the system, it resembles handover. No civilization here was meant to dominate permanently. Each contributed something essential, then exhausted itself. Balance was never achieved by a single people, but by accumulation, imperfect, overlapping, unfinished. The world is not broken because civilizations ended. It would be broken if one had never ended. Why grandeur is always temporary. Every attempt at permanence created imbalance. The precursors sought mastery and fractured reality.
The elves sought preservation and stalled change. Humans sought progress and multiplied consequences. Grandeur always pushed too far. What lasted instead were modest things: a tunnel that still drains water, a glade that still softens magic, a road that still bends where it should. The quiet contributions endured longer than the grand visions. Listening as survival. Those who live longest in this world are not the strongest. They are the most attentive. They notice when birds avoid certain ruins, when dogs refuse a path, when magic feels thicker in the air before storms. These signals are not superstition. They are the world communicating in the only way it can. Lost civilizations still speak, not in words, but in consequences. Why hope here is subtle. Hope does not announce itself. It appears in small continuities. A village that learns where not to expand. A mage who chooses restraint over brilliance. A witcher who walks away after restoring balance rather than seeking praise. Hope survives by staying quiet, by not challenging the world's limits. The long view. Seen from above, this world is scarred. Seen from within, it is adaptive. It does not promise improvement, it offers sustainability. And in a land shaped by forgotten empires and unfinished experiments, that offer is not small, it is everything. The illusion of order. At some point, humans noticed something important. The world was not pure chaos, but it was not orderly either. It existed in a trembling space between the two. And instead of correcting that imbalance, human civilization began to draw lines over it. Laws, calendars, borders, taxes. These were not created to control the world. They were created to make it legible. Because the human mind cannot hold layered reality in its raw form for long.
What human order actually does. Kingdoms appear to exist for protection, but their deeper function is something quieter. They localize uncertainty. A crown gives fear a face. A capital gives chaos an address. A law gives randomness a reason. When monsters roam everywhere, panic spreads everywhere. When monsters are said to live beyond the border, fear becomes manageable. Order does not remove danger. It tells people where to expect it. Why borders feel fragile. Borders in this world are not drawn by geography alone. They are drawn by tolerance. A forest is considered wild not because it is unexplored, but because it resists stable patterns. A marsh is avoided not because it is empty, but because it refuses predictability. Old ruins are marked on maps not to invite travel, but to frame uncertainty. This is why borders constantly shift, not because armies advance, but because the land pushes back. The administrative response to a layered world. Human bureaucracy grows dense in this world for a reason. Records are kept obsessively. Lineages are tracked. Titles are archived. Paper becomes a defense mechanism. If something can be named, recorded, and filed, it feels less threatening. Even curses are documented. Even forbidden spells are categorized. Even disasters are given dates. This is not arrogance, it is survival through classification. Why this order never fully works. Despite all this,
the world continues to behave independently. A village follows every law and still vanishes overnight. A well-maintained road suddenly becomes haunted. A treaty holds on parchment while violence grows underneath it. This happens because human systems operate on the surface layer only. They do not reach the buried mechanisms below. They do not account for ancient pressure points, for dormant magical feedback, for unfinished designs left behind by civilizations that thought more slowly. Order here is always provisional. The quiet acceptance of failure. Over time, human rulers stop dreaming of perfect control. They begin settling for containment. A monster problem managed, not solved. A curse isolated, not lifted. A region taxed, even if unsafe. This is when kingdoms stop expanding and start enduring.
Part 12. Places that refuse to forget. Some locations in this world behave differently. Not violently, persistently. No matter how often they are rebuilt, renamed, or repurposed, they return to the same patterns. A town burns, and when rebuilt, fire returns. A fortress collapses, and whatever replaces it falls the same way. A crossroads draws conflict across centuries regardless of who controls it. These are not coincidences, they are memory loops. How places store history. In the Witcher world, land does not remember events. It remembers stress. Where magic was overused, reality remains thin. Where violence repeated, probability bends. Where rituals failed, feedback lingers. This is why certain places attract the same outcomes repeatedly. The land learned a behavior, and now it repeats it. Why rebuilding often makes things worse. When humans rebuild ruins without understanding them, they reintroduce pressure into fragile systems. A dwarven tunnel repurposed as a cellar alters airflow. An elven foundation used for a keep destabilizes nearby ley lines. Nothing explodes immediately. Instead, tension accumulates. Then something adapts, usually something alive. The role of superstition. People notice these patterns long before scholars do, so they create rules. Do not whistle near that hill. Do not sleep under that arch. Do not draw water after sunset here. These rules sound irrational, but they are the distilled conclusions of generations who survived by paying attention. Superstition is not ignorance. It is compressed experience. Why witchers trust villagers. Witchers listen carefully when locals speak, not because villagers understand magic, but because they understand patterns. A villager cannot explain ley line disruption, but they know when livestock refuses to graze, and that is often enough. Part 13. Civilizations that became background noise. Eventually, the idea of a lost civilization changes meaning. It stops being something tragic. It becomes something structural. People no longer think, this was once a great empire. They think, this road always cracks here. The civilization becomes invisible, but still active. When ruins become infrastructure, many cities unknowingly rely on ancient systems. Drainage follows dwarven gradients.
Market districts align with old magical convergence zones. Walls stand because they rest on precursor load-bearing geometry. Remove the ruin entirely, and the city collapses. So ruins are left intact, quietly respected. Why erasing the past is dangerous. Occasionally, someone attempts total purification. A ruler orders all ruins demolished. A mage tries to seal every ley line. A priest declares ancient sites cursed and burns them. The result is never cleanliness. It is instability. The past does not like being erased. It prefers being ignored. A world running on inheritance. This world does not progress. It circulates. Power changes hands, but structure remains. Beliefs evolve, but foundations persist. Languages shift, but place names echo older tongues. Lost civilizations become background processes, like gravity, unnoticed, unavoidable. Part 14. The economics of a broken world. As centuries passed, people stopped asking why the world behaved this way. They began asking something else. How do we live inside it? This question reshaped everything, not just culture, but economy. Because in a world layered with ruins and instability, value itself behaves differently. Why wealth never fully stabilizes. In many worlds, wealth accumulates. Here, it circulates uneasily. A mine prospers until it reaches an old dwarven chamber and collapses. A trade route thrives until a ruin awakens something nearby. A city grows rich until the land beneath it shifts. This makes long-term accumulation risky, so wealth becomes liquid. Merchants invest quickly. Guilds diversify obsessively. Kings tax constantly, fearing tomorrow's loss. Money does not represent abundance here. It represents temporary alignment with stability. Why certain professions always exist. Some trades never disappear, not because they are noble, but because they interact directly with instability. Monster hunters, surveyors, runesmiths, relic appraisers. These professions exist to interpret danger. They translate ancient systems into modern decisions. A witcher explains whether a problem can be removed. A surveyor explains whether land can be used. A runesmith explains whether an object should remain buried. This is applied history, paid in coin. Why relics are both valuable and feared. Artifacts from lost civilizations are coveted and avoided. A sword forged before human kingdoms may cut unnaturally well. A crystal grown in an elven city may amplify magic effortlessly. A precursor device may solve problems no one fully understands. But using relics is dangerous. They operate under old assumptions. They belong to systems that no longer exist. This mismatch creates risk, which is why relic trade is heavily regulated. Officially. Unofficially, it thrives. The black market as a pressure valve. In this world, the black market does not exist because of greed. It exists because official systems cannot absorb everything. Forbidden magic still needs outlets. Unstable artifacts still need handlers. Knowledge too dangerous for academies still circulates. Illicit trade functions like a drainage system. Without it, pressure would build elsewhere. And when pressure builds here, it rarely releases cleanly. Part 15. education without foundations. Learning in this world is cautious, because knowledge itself can destabilize. Why schools avoid certain questions. Human academies teach magic carefully, not because they fear ignorance, but because some truths once learned cannot be unlearned. Students are taught effects before causes, rules before origins, boundaries before theory. This creates competent practitioners, but incomplete ones. Understanding too much too early leads to experimentation, and experimentation is how earlier civilizations fell. Why elves teach through story. Elves do not write comprehensive manuals, they tell stories, because stories slow understanding. They introduce nuance gradually. They embed warnings emotionally. They resist misuse. An elven tale does not explain how to bend magic. It explains what happens when someone tries. This is safer. Why dwarven knowledge is passed through apprenticeship. Long, tedious, precise. Not because dwarves lack imagination, but because their systems punish error harshly. Stone does not forgive improvisation. A poorly placed support collapses decades later. So learning is conservative and slow. Part 16. Language as a fossil record. Words survive longer than buildings, and in this world, language preserves what stone no longer shows. Why place names never fully change. Cities are renamed, but something always remains. A syllable, a sound, a rhythm. These remnants often come from older tongues, elven, dwarven, unknown. They describe terrain, magic density, danger. People repeat them without knowing why, but the words still work. Why certain words feel heavy. Some words resist casual use, not because they are sacred, but because they refer to systems no longer understood. Names of ancient orders, titles of vanished roles, terms for magical states that no longer exist. Speaking them incorrectly feels wrong, because they once did something. Language as containment. Naming is a form of control, but incomplete naming is safer. This is why many things here are known by descriptions, not true names. The thing in the marsh, the old road, the broken tower. Precision invites interaction. Vagueness creates distance. Part 17. Faith after the gods withdrew. Religion in this world is careful, because the gods were never fully absent. Why belief is fragmented. Some gods were real, some were projections, some were entities mistaken for gods. The conjunction blurred these distinctions, so belief fractured. Different regions worship differently, not because of theology, but because experience differed. A place where something answered prayer remembers that forever. A place where nothing responded builds quieter faith. Religion becomes local, practical, cautious. Why priests rarely claim certainty. Certainty attracts attention, and attention attracts response. Some priests know this, so they speak softly. They frame belief as guidance, not command. They avoid absolutes, because in a world where gods once walked, absolutes tend to provoke consequences. Part 18. Why the world prefers balance over justice. Justice implies correction. Balance implies accommodation. This world chose the second, not because justice is unimportant, but because correcting everything would require dismantling the entire structure, and no one remembers how to rebuild it safely. So wrongs are managed, not erased. Part 19. Travel through a world that pushes back. Movement in this world is never neutral. To travel is to negotiate with layers. A road is not simply a path from one place to another. It is a compromise struck long ago between terrain, memory, and survival. People follow routes not because they are shortest, but because they are permitted. Some paths allow passage, others merely tolerate it. Why roads curve without reason? Many roads avoid direct lines. They bend around empty fields. They twist through forests without cutting through them. They skirt ruins without approaching their centers. To an outsider, this looks inefficient. To those who know the land, it is precision. Straight roads disturb old pressure points. Straight roads cross lines that should not be crossed. The land responds to intrusion, so roads learn to speak its language. The invisible cost of travel. Travelers pay tolls, but not all of them are collected in coin. Time is lost near certain places. Dreams become restless after passing old sites. Animals grow skittish days before danger appears. These costs are accepted without complaint, because refusing to pay them invites worse consequences. Why caravans move slowly. Speed attracts attention, not political attention, environmental attention. Rapid movement disrupts equilibrium. It creates noise, pressure, vibration. In places layered with old systems, that disturbance can trigger responses. Caravans move slowly to blend, to become background activity, to avoid reminding the world that they are there. Part 20. Cities that never feel finished. Cities in this world are always under construction and always under repair, not because they are poorly designed, but because they sit atop something older that continues to adjust. Why urban growth follows invisible constraints. A district thrives while another stagnates. A street becomes prosperous while its parallel declines. Certain areas are never built upon despite demand. These patterns repeat across cities. They are not economic accidents. They are responses to buried systems. The role of old foundations. Builders often discover ancient stone beneath their work. Sometimes they stop. Sometimes they adapt. Sometimes they pretend not to notice. Those choices shape the city's future. A structure aligned with old geometry endures. One that ignores it cracks, sags, or attracts problems. Urban planning becomes an unspoken dialogue with the past. Why cities feel tense at night. At night, activity quiets, and deeper processes surface. Magic redistributes. Residual enchantments assert themselves. Creatures move through spaces unnoticed by day. This is why cities never fully sleep. Watch patrols exist not just for crime, but for anomalies. Night reveals what daylight conceals. Part 21. The psychology of inherited danger. Living here shapes the mind, not through fear, through calibration. Why people appear emotionally reserved. Expressiveness is costly in unstable environments. Strong emotions affect magic. Magic affects outcomes. So people learn moderation, not suppression, but control. Joy exists. Grief exists. They are simply quieter. Why humor is dark? Laughter releases pressure. In a world carrying centuries of unresolved tension, humor becomes a safety mechanism. Jokes acknowledge danger without challenging it. They say, "We see this, we survived it." This is not cynicism, it is collective resilience. Why trust is local? People trust neighbors. They trust routines. They trust what is already proven survivable. Abstract promises mean little. Experience matters more. Part 22. The Myth of Progress. Human thinkers still speak of advancement, but the word means something different here. Progress as adaptation, not improvement. New tools do not replace old ones. They coexist. Magic supplements steel. Tradition supplements law. Superstition supplements knowledge. Removing any layer destabilizes the whole. Why innovation is conservative? Truly radical ideas are rare, not because creativity lacks, but because experimentation carries generational consequences. A failed spell may poison land for decades. A new construction method may awaken dormant systems. So innovation advances cautiously, incrementally. Part 23. Monsters as environmental feedback. Monsters are not enemies in the traditional sense. They are indicators. What monsters reveal? Where necrophages gather, death is unresolved. Where specters appear, memory remains active. Where hybrids form, systems overlap improperly. A monster marks imbalance. Killing it treats the symptom, not the cause. Why witchers study patterns, not creatures. Witchers learn habits, migration cycles, territorial triggers, environmental dependencies. They ask not "what is this?" but "why is this here?" Because removing the wrong creature destabilizes something else. Part 24. Silence as a skill. There are moments when action worsens everything, and knowing when not to act becomes essential. Why some ruins are left untouched. Certain places are marked, not by signs, by absence. No roads lead there, no villages approach them, no stories describe them clearly. This is intentional. Attention feeds instability. Silence starves it. The discipline of non-intervention. Restraint here is not cowardice, it is expertise. Those who survive longest learn to let systems settle on their own. Intervention is a last resort.
Part 25. The world as an ongoing conversation. Nothing here is static, not even ruins. They continue interacting with climate, magic, and life. The world speaks constantly, through patterns, through repetition, through resistance. Listening is not mystical, it is practical. Part 26. Borders that breathe. Borders in this world are not fixed lines. They inhale and exhale. A kingdom's edge shifts not only after wars, but after winters, famines, magical surges, and the slow decay of what once held the land together. A forest creeps forward when human attention wanes.
A marsh expands when an old drainage system finally collapses. Mountains close passes after centuries of quiet erosion. Maps are always outdated, not because cartographers are careless, because the land does not stay still. Why border conflicts rarely end? Many conflicts are described as political, few actually are. Two kingdoms argue over a valley because it suddenly became fertile again. A pass is fortified because something beneath it stirred. A river becomes a boundary because its course changed after underground structures failed. Diplomacy tries to freeze these changes. The land refuses. So conflicts repeat, not from hatred, from geography remembering something rulers do not. The unspoken role of scouts and pathfinders. Scouts are not valued for speed, they are valued for sensitivity. The best ones notice when sound behaves differently, when animals avoid routes they once used, when air pressure shifts near old ground. They do not report danger directly, they report irregularity, which is often more important. Part 27. The slow collapse of certainty. Certainty is expensive here. Every belief must be defended against contradiction from the world itself. Why absolute truth is distrusted. Someone claims a ruin is safe. Then a century passes, and it is not. Someone declares a monster extinct. Then conditions align again, and it returns. This creates a culture of conditional belief. People say, usually. They say, so far. They say, as long as nothing changes. This is not pessimism, it is accuracy. How this shapes law and custom. Laws here are flexible by necessity. Exceptions are expected. Clauses multiply. Local interpretations override central ones. Rigid law collapses quickly. Adaptable law survives, even if it feels inconsistent.
Part 28. Memory without nostalgia. Interestingly, nostalgia is rare. People do not long for a golden age, because no such age existed universally. Every period had costs hidden elsewhere. Why the past is not romanticized. Elves remember their height of power. They also remember its fragility. Dwarves recall thriving holds. They also remember the seals closing. Humans celebrate early expansion. They also inherit its damage. So remembrance is tempered. The past is studied, not idealized. Monuments as warnings, not celebrations. Statues crumble. Markers weather. Not always from neglect, sometimes intentionally. Too much reverence attracts repetition, and repetition leads to imbalance. Part 29. Time as pressure, not distance. Time does not feel far away here. It feels heavy. Why old decisions still matter? Because systems persist. A tunnel dug centuries ago still redirects water. A spell cast once still affects migration. A city founded carelessly still struggles with unrest. Time magnifies consequences. It does not soften them. Generational knowledge as survival. Families pass down instructions, not stories. Do not farm here. Do not drink there. Do not build past that tree. The reasons are often forgotten. The rules remain, because they worked. Part 30. The emotional ecology. Emotions, like magic, interact with the environment. This is subtle,
but real. Why certain places feel heavy. Not because of ghosts, because strong emotion altered local patterns. Fear repeated long enough leaves residue. Despair concentrated enough alters behavior. Places learn responses. People feel them without explanation. Why communities mourn quietly. Large displays draw attention. Attention destabilizes. So grief becomes communal but restrained. Shared meals, silent vigils, routine maintained. This keeps emotional pressure distributed.
Part 31. Failure as a teaching mechanism. This world teaches by letting things fail, often gently, sometimes catastrophically. Why warnings are rarely explicit. Explicit warnings cause panic. Panic accelerates harm. So the world signals gradually. Small signs ignored become larger ones. Those who listen early survive. Those who demand certainty do not. Learning through near disaster. Villages adapt after close calls. Routes are altered. Practices change. Stories gain a new line. Disaster avoided is the best lesson. Part 32. The persistence of care. Despite everything, care remains. People still tend fields, still repair roads, still teach children. This is not defiance, it is alignment. Why care is the most stable force. Care works with the world's pace. It does not rush. It does not demand resolution. It maintains. And maintenance is what this world rewards. A world held together gently. Nothing here is perfect, but many things are sufficient, and sufficiency, over long stretches of time, becomes a form of success. Part 33. Night work and the people who do it. There are professions that only exist after sunset, not because daylight forbids them, but because night reveals what the day conceals. Grave wardens patrol borders between burial grounds and living quarters. Lamplighters adjust routes based on how shadows behave near old stone. Watchmen learn to recognize silence that feels wrong, not merely quiet. These roles are rarely celebrated, they are trusted. Why night is a diagnostic tool. At night, ambient magic redistributes. Residual enchantments become audible as pressure. Creatures follow older paths unmasked by noise. Ruins express themselves through temperature shifts. Those who work at night are not braver, they are more observant. They learn the world's off hours. The language of small signs. A flickering flame near a bridge, condensation forming on dry stone, an echo that arrives half a breath late. These are not omens, they are diagnostics. Night workers read them like ledgers. Part 34. Food, land, and inherited safety. Even sustenance is shaped by history. Certain grains thrive only where ancient drainage still functions. Some orchards grow sweeter near stabilized ley flows. Other areas refuse cultivation entirely, regardless of effort. People learn these patterns early. They call them tradition. Why diets are regional? Diet choices here are not cultural quirks. They are risk assessments. Root vegetables dominate where surface instability is high.
Livestock is preferred where roaming creatures keep fields unsafe. Fishing thrives where land cannot be trusted. Cuisine becomes cartography. Preservation as respect. Salting, smoking, fermenting. These methods persist not for flavor alone, but because they reduce dependence on uncertain supply lines. Fresh abundance is celebrated. Stored reliability is honored. Part 35. Weather that remembers. Storms behave differently over old ground. Rain lingers above buried chambers. Fog pools where magic once stabilized air. Snow melts unevenly over ancient foundations. Weather becomes a historian. Why forecasting is intuitive. People do not predict weather by instruments alone. They watch animals. They feel pressure in joints near ruins. They smell iron where storms will break. These cues are not mystical. They are cumulative observation. Disasters that avoid names. Some storms are never named. Naming grants attention. Attention concentrates impact. So people describe events indirectly. The bad winter, the long rain, the night the river changed. This keeps memory usable. Part 36. Trade as diplomacy with the past. Merchants here do more than move goods. They negotiate safe passage between systems. Routes are tested seasonally. Warehouses are placed where ground feels cooperative. Contracts include clauses for interruption by anomalies. Trade persists because it adapts. Why certain goods travel together. Iron with salt, grain with oil, relics with documentation. Pairing stabilizes risk. If one fails, the other compensates. This is learned behavior, not theory. Caravans as moving archives. Caravans carry stories, not myths. Updates. Which road collapsed? Which ruin stirred? Which village relocated quietly? Information moves with goods. It always has.
Part 37. Medicine without illusions. Healing here is pragmatic. Physicians treat injuries first, then environment, then causes, if possible. Why cures are conservative. Aggressive cures risk imbalance. A potion may heal flesh but disrupt magic tolerance. A ritual may cleanse infection but attract attention. A charm may stabilize one system and unsettle another. So treatments are incremental. Observe, adjust, wait. Patience saves lives. Illness as signal. Some sicknesses indicate exposure rather than disease. Fatigue near certain sites. Recurring dreams after travel. Numbness following contact with relics. Healers track patterns. They advise relocation more often than remedies. Part 38. Children and early calibration. Children adapt fastest. They learn what adults explain around, not directly. How children learn safety. They are told where not to play, not why. Curiosity is guided, not suppressed. Over time, children internalize boundaries. They feel them. Games as training. Games mimic danger. Tag avoids certain zones. Hide and seek excludes old walls. Stories include choices with consequences. Play becomes rehearsal. Part 39. Art that does not provoke. Art exists everywhere, but it avoids excess. Why art is subtle. Bold displays attract response. Quiet art integrates. Murals follow old geometry. Songs use scales that avoid resonance. Sculptures align with stress lines.
Artists learn restraint early. Art as maintenance. Decorations mark safe zones. Music regulates communal emotion. Rituals pace the year. Art maintains equilibrium. It does not challenge it.
Part 40. Silence between events. Most of life happens between notable moments, between attacks, between discoveries, between collapses. This space matters most. Why waiting is active. Waiting allows systems to settle. Intervention too soon multiplies damage. Those who understand this do not rush, they prepare. The skill of staying. Staying is harder than leaving. It requires trust in patterns, in history, in the land's capacity to hold. Those who stay become anchors. Part 41. Work that leaves no records. Some of the most important labor in this world is never written down. It leaves no contracts, no seals, no public acknowledgement. It happens quietly, often at the edge of settlements, where land and history meet without ceremony. Those who close things. There are people whose task is not to build or repair, but to end processes safely. They collapse tunnels that should no longer be entered. They dismantle relics that have begun to destabilize. They burn records that attract dangerous curiosity. This work is destructive only on the surface. In truth, it is preventative. Why closure requires anonymity. To be known for ending something invites questions. Questions invite repetition. So those who close things rarely leave names behind. They act under authority that is temporary, vague, and often unofficial. Their success is measured by absence. If nothing happens afterward, they did their job correctly. Part 42. Knowledge that is allowed to decay. Not all information is preserved. Some is intentionally allowed to fade. Why forgetting is sometimes necessary. Certain truths become hazardous once context is lost. A spell without its safeguards, a map without its warnings, a theory without its limitations. As generations pass, nuance erodes. At some point, the safest option is silence. Controlled loss. Libraries curate absence as carefully as presence. Pages are removed, annotations are erased, entire sections are sealed. This is not censorship driven by power, it is conservation driven by survival. Part 43. Rituals without origins. Many rituals are practiced without anyone remembering why. They work anyway. Why rituals persist. A candle lit at a certain hour. A bell rung before travel. A pause observed before entering old spaces. These acts align behavior with invisible systems. Even stripped of meaning, they retain function. Ritual as calibration. Rituals regulate timing, movement, and attention. They slow people down. Slowness prevents error.
Part 44. The soft authority of elders. Elders hold influence without command. Why elders are listened to. Not because they are wiser, but because they have seen patterns repeat. They recognize early signs. They do not explain everything. They simply say, "Not yet," and people listen. Age as data accumulation. Living long here means surviving many cycles. That survival itself becomes evidence. Part 45. The concept of enough. Ambition here matures quickly.
Why expansion slows naturally. Settlements reach a point where growing larger increases risk. More people stress systems. More construction disrupts layers. More trade attracts attention. So growth stops. Not from lack of desire, from understanding. Enough as success. A village that lasts is considered prosperous, not one that grows endlessly. Longevity outweighs scale. Part 46. Decision-making without urgency. Urgency is treated with suspicion. Why fast decisions are dangerous. Rapid choices bypass observation. They miss secondary effects. They assume the world will cooperate. It rarely does. Deliberation as protection. Meetings take time. Silence is allowed. People wait to see if conditions change on their own. Often they do. Part 47. What counts as failure? Failure here is not collapse. It is misalignment. Redefining failure. A city destroyed by war is not necessarily a failure. A city that ignores its foundations is. Failure is ignoring signals, not suffering consequences. Recovery without blame. When things go wrong, blame is minimal. Focus shifts to adjustment. Shame wastes energy. Correction restores balance.
Part 48. The rhythm of repair. Repair is ongoing, never complete. Why maintenance is continuous. Nothing is permanently fixed. Everything requires monitoring. Monitoring requires presence. Presence builds familiarity. Repair as relationship. Those who repair know the land personally. They notice when something feels different. That intuition cannot be taught. It is earned. Part 49. The space between systems. Not everything fits neatly. People who live between roles. Some individuals defy categorization. Not witchers, not mages, not officials. They operate between systems. They translate. They mediate. They prevent escalation. Why these people are hard to replace. They are shaped by experience, not training. Losing them creates gaps. Those gaps widen quickly. Part 50. The quiet continuation. Life here is not dramatic by default. Drama is interruption. Continuity is achievement. Why ordinary days matter most. Most days pass without incident. That is the goal. Every uneventful day confirms alignment. The world's preference. The world does not demand reverence. It prefers cooperation. It responds best to those who listen, adapt, and act sparingly. Part 49. The margins where rules blur. Every system creates edges, places where rules apply unevenly, moments where customs contradict necessity, people who live just outside definitions. These margins are not failures. They are buffers. Why the margins absorb shock. When pressure builds, it does not break the center first. It moves outward. Markets adjust before courts do.
Rumors travel before decrees. Unofficial routes change before roads are closed. The margins feel shifts early. They flex. This prevents fractures elsewhere.
Those who choose the edge. Some people gravitate toward uncertain spaces. Border villagers, independent traders, wanderers without fixed allegiance. They are not reckless. They understand that rigid systems fail suddenly. Flexible lives fail gradually. Gradual failure is survivable. Part 52. The slow mathematics of risk. Risk here is not calculated once. It is recalculated constantly. Why decisions are reversible. People avoid commitments that cannot be undone. Buildings are modular. Agreements include exit conditions. Routes have alternatives prepared. This is not lack of confidence, it is respect for volatility. Acceptable loss. Every action includes an allowance for loss. Not everything can be saved. Acknowledging this early prevents desperation later. Part 53. Objects that carry memory. Some objects feel heavier than they should. Not physically, contextually. Why certain items are treated carefully. A blade reforged from ancient steel, a cup used in forgotten rites, a key that fits no visible lock. These items are handled slowly, not because they are sacred, but because they belong to older systems. They respond poorly to haste. Inheritance as responsibility. Passing down objects includes instructions, not legends. Do not sell this. Do not repair that. Do not take this near ruins. Ownership implies stewardship. Part 54. The social function of distance. Distance here is intentional. Why villages are spaced unevenly. Some settlements are close, others are isolated by design. Distance allows disturbances to dissipate. Too many people concentrated near unstable ground amplifies effects. Spacing is safety. Social distance as buffer. People maintain polite reserve with strangers, not suspicion, calibration. Trust grows slowly, because trust creates dependency, and dependency multiplies risk. Part 55. What is considered brave? Bravery here is understated. Quiet courage, choosing not to investigate, choosing to walk away, choosing to seal a door permanently. These acts prevent stories, which is the point. Why loud heroism is rare. Dramatic action disrupts systems. It solves immediate problems, then creates new ones. So loud heroes are tolerated briefly. Quiet ones endure. Part 56. The value of redundancy. Nothing here exists alone. Why systems overlap. Multiple water sources, multiple supply routes, multiple traditions for the same event. Redundancy absorbs failure. Efficiency is secondary. Inefficiency as insurance. What looks wasteful
is often protective. Extra effort distributes load. Distribution prevents collapse. Part 57. Teaching without explanation. Much is learned without words. Observation over instruction. Children watch where adults hesitate. They notice what is avoided. This teaches boundaries more effectively than lectures. Learning by rhythm. Daily routines encode knowledge. When to work, when to stop, when to wait. Timing is instruction. Part 58. The ethics of non-resolution. Not every problem demands a solution. Problems that are managed. A haunting redirected. A curse contained. A ruin cordoned off. Resolution implies finality. Finality is risky. Management is safer. Living with open threads. Unfinished matters remain visible. This reminds people of limits. Limits preserve balance. Part 59. Attention as a resource. Attention shapes outcomes. Why attention is regulated. Focusing too strongly on anomalies strengthens them. Ignoring them entirely lets them spread. So attention is measured, brief, purposeful, withdrawn quickly. Collective focus. Communities decide what to notice. This shared calibration stabilizes reality.
Part 60. The world's long memory. The world does not forgive, but it adapts. Adaptation over judgment. Consequences are not punishment, they are feedback. Understanding feedback improves survival. Living inside feedback. People adjust behavior continuously. This creates a conversation with the world, not domination, not surrender, dialogue. Part 61. The places where time hesitates. There are locations where time behaves reluctantly. Not frozen, not broken, just slower. People notice it first in small ways. A candle burns unevenly. Footsteps echo longer than expected. Conversations feel slightly delayed, as if the air itself is listening before allowing words to pass. These places are not dangerous by default. They are congested. Why time slows? Time here is not a single current, it is braided. When multiple civilizations shaped the same location, their systems overlapped. Each introduced its own rhythm, magical, structural, emotional. When those rhythms never fully resolved, time learned to hesitate. It waits for alignment that never quite arrives. How people use these places. Some avoid them entirely. Others use them carefully. Messages are delivered there because urgency softens. Arguments cool down. Decisions feel heavier, more deliberate. Traders finalize contracts in such places, trusting the slower pace to reveal mistakes before they harden. Time hesitation becomes a tool. Part 62. The unwritten agreement with danger. No one signs it. Everyone follows it. The agreement. If danger remains predictable, it will be tolerated. A monster that hunts only in winter. A ruin that reacts only to sound. A curse that activates only under specific conditions. These are not eradicated immediately. They are monitored. Predictability allows coexistence. When eradication happens. Only when behavior changes. Only when patterns break.
Unpredictability is what triggers response, not severity. Part 63. The weight of naming. Names matter here, not magically, structurally. Why some things are left unnamed. A thing without a name resists categorization. Without category, systems cannot target it easily. This is sometimes protection. A phenomenon described vaguely remains diffuse. A precisely named one becomes fixed. Fixation attracts attention. Renaming as control. Kings rename regions to assert authority. Priests rename places to reshape belief. Scholars rename phenomena to claim understanding. The land responds inconsistently. Sometimes renaming works. Sometimes it provokes.
Part 70. The world's preference for gradualism. The world responds best to small adjustments. Incremental change. One stone moved. One habit altered. One rule relaxed. Each shift tested before continuing. Why gradualism works? It allows correction. It invites feedback. It respects complexity. Part 71. The craft of listening. In this world, listening is a learned profession. Not the listening of obedience, but the listening of calibration. The kind that notices when a sound does not belong, when a pause lasts too long, when the land answers differently than it did yesterday. Those who listen well are rarely central figures. They stand slightly aside. Listening beyond sound. Listening here is not limited to ears. It includes texture underfoot, the way smoke rises, the reluctance of doors to close smoothly. Each detail is a sentence in a language without grammar. Those who rush miss it entirely. Why listening is taught indirectly. No one explains listening directly. They demonstrate it. A pause before speaking. A hand raised to stop movement. A decision delayed without justification. Apprentices learn by watching restraint. Part 72. Settlements that move without traveling. Some villages relocate without ever leaving their place. How this happens. Houses are rebuilt gradually uphill. Fields shift away from certain zones. Paths are redirected season by season. After decades, the village stands somewhere else. No announcement was made. No plan declared. Adaptation occurred quietly. Why this prevents disaster? Abrupt relocation disturbs systems. Gradual drift allows the land to respond gently. The village survives. The old location becomes background. Part 73. The value of being unremarkable. Being unremarkable is a survival trait. Why attention is dangerous. Attention concentrates expectation. Expectation alters probability. Altered probability produces anomalies. So communities avoid distinction. They remain average, predictable, boring, deliberate plainness. Buildings avoid symmetry that resonates. Clothing avoids extremes. Festivals avoid excessive spectacle. This is not lack of creativity. It is camouflage. Part 74. When systems conflict. Occasionally, two stable systems overlap. The result is tension. Examples of conflict. A dwarven drainage channel intersects an elven root network. A human road crosses a ley line used by migrating entities. A trade hub grows atop a dormant ritual site. Each system behaves correctly on its own. Together, they strain. Conflict resolution.
The solution is rarely dominance. One system yields partially. Both adjust. Compromise prevents collapse.
Part 75. The Ethics of Curiosity. Curiosity is not discouraged, it is paced. Why curiosity is risky. Every question invites an answer. Some answers alter behavior. Some alter environment. Some alter the questioner permanently. So curiosity is guided. Safe curiosity. Study without interference. Observation without interaction. Simulation without activation. These boundaries keep inquiry sustainable. Part 76. The Usefulness of Inconvenience. Inconvenience slows people down. Why convenience is treated carefully. Too much convenience accelerates behavior. Acceleration reduces observation. Reduced observation increases error. So friction is built into systems. Examples of productive friction. Long paperwork for permits. Mandatory waiting periods. Routes that require rest stops. Each delay filters recklessness. Part 77. The Social Role of Refusal. Saying no is respected. Refusal as stabilization. Not every request is fulfilled. Not every opportunity pursued. Refusal prevents overextension. Who refuses? Elders. Caretakers. Those who have seen cycles repeat. Their refusal is not obstruction. It is pattern recognition. Part 78. The Language of Where. Where tells stories. Interpreting where. Uneven steps indicate altered gravity. Polished stone reveals frequent hesitation. Cracked mortar shows stress points. Where is data? Maintenance through observation. Repair begins only after patterns are understood. Premature repair hides information. Part 80. The Social Acceptance of Uncertainty. Uncertainty is not weakness. Living with unknowns. People acknowledge gaps openly. They say, "We do not know." This prevents false certainty. False certainty is dangerous. Uncertainty as shared space. Not knowing invites collaboration. It distributes responsibility. Part 80. The Long Middle. Most lives exist in the long middle, after origins, before endings. This is where meaning accumulates. Why the middle matters. Beginnings attract attention. Endings attract interpretation. The middle sustains everything. Life without narrative pressure. People live without expecting resolution. They adjust, they continue, they maintain. This is not resignation, it is alignment with a world that never truly finishes anything. Part 81. Apprenticeship to the Unseen. No one here learns everything at once. Knowledge arrives in layers, like the world itself. Learning by proximity. Apprentices are not taught through lectures, they are placed nearby, near an old wall that behaves strangely, near a river that shifts course without warning.
near a task that requires attention rather than strength. They learn by standing close enough to feel resistance. Mistakes that are allowed. Small errors are tolerated. Large ones are prevented. An apprentice may misjudge a sound. They may choose the wrong hour. They may misunderstand a sign, but someone older is always nearby, not to correct immediately, to intervene only if necessary. Part 82. The social use of silence. Silence is not absence, it is coordination, shared quiet. In meetings, silence is not awkward, it is functional. Silence allows patterns to surface. Someone notices a contradiction. Someone remembers an exception. Someone senses timing is wrong. Silence creates space for these signals. When silence ends. Silence ends when enough has been felt, not when everyone agrees. Agreement is optional. Alignment is not. Part 83. Tools that teach their own limits. Tools here are not optimized for maximum output. They are optimized for feedback. Design that resists abuse. A hammer that vibrates unpleasantly if used too forcefully. A blade that dulls quickly if misaligned. A lock that jams if rushed. These are not flaws, they are instructions. Why perfect tools are dangerous. A tool without resistance hides consequences. Hidden consequences accumulate. Accumulation leads to failure elsewhere. So tools push back. Part 84. The gradual disappearance of excess. Over time, excess fades. How this happens. Lavish decorations weather faster. Overbuilt structures crack sooner. Overly complex systems fail under minor strain. What remains is what fit the environment, not what impressed it. Elegance through survival. Elegance here is not design, it is persistence. What lasts becomes beautiful. Part 85. The ethics of repairing what is old. Repair is not restoration. Why things are not rebuilt as they were. Original conditions no longer exist. Rebuilding exactly recreates old stress, so repair adapts. Materials change, shapes soften, functions shift. Continuity matters more than fidelity. Knowing when not to repair. Some damage is a warning. Sealing them removes information, so some damage is left visible. This preserves awareness. Part 86. Living with partial explanations. No explanation here is complete. Completeness invites finality. Finality encourages decisive action. Decisive action ignores feedback, so explanations remain partial. Partial understanding as safety. Knowing enough to act carefully is better than knowing everything. Everything invites overconfidence.
Part 87. The emotional economy of restraint. Restraint is rewarded socially. Why calm is valued. Calm spreads. Agitation concentrates. Concentration amplifies instability. So calm becomes currency. Expressions that are encouraged. Gratitude, patience, measured concern. Expressions that distribute emotion evenly. Part 88. The use of time as material. Time is shaped deliberately. Scheduling for stability. Work begins at certain hours. Travel pauses at predictable intervals. Festivals follow natural cycles, not political calendars. Timing aligns human activity with environmental tolerance. Why rushing is discouraged. Rushing compresses cause and effect. Compression obscures feedback. Feedback prevents disaster. Part 89. The subtlety of authority. Authority rarely announces itself. How authority is recognized. People stop arguing. Not because someone commands, because someone has demonstrated alignment. Authority follows reliability. Why titles matter less. Titles attract attention. Attention increases load. Load destabilizes. So authority stays modest. Part 90. The continuity of ordinary care. Most effort here goes unnoticed. Invisible labor. Clearing drains before rain. Checking supports before winter. Adjusting routines quietly. This labor prevents stories, which is success. Care as the true constant. Civilizations rose and fell. Care persisted. Not dramatic care, ordinary care, repeated daily. This is what allows the world to continue holding itself together. Part 91. The gentle discipline of observation. Observation here is not passive. It is a practiced restraint. People learn early that seeing is not enough. One must notice without intervening. Intervening too soon changes the outcome being observed. Waiting too long allows conditions to harden. So observation becomes a balance. Watching without disturbing. Birds are watched from certain distances. Ruins are observed from angles that avoid resonance. Weather is tracked by reflection, not measurement alone. The goal is to learn without becoming part of the system being studied. Why observation is shared. No one observes alone for long. One person misses patterns. Many people compare impressions. Consensus emerges slowly. This protects against individual error. Part 92. The inheritance of responsibility. Responsibility here is not assigned, it is noticed. How responsibility finds people. Someone repairs the same wall repeatedly. Someone is always the first to notice change. Someone remembers past adjustments accurately. Over time, people begin turning to them. Responsibility settles quietly. Why refusal is allowed. No one is forced to accept responsibility. Forced stewardship breeds resentment. Resentment destabilizes judgment. So responsibility must be chosen. Part 93. The quiet geography of trust. Trust maps itself differently than territory. Where trust accumulates. Not in capitals, not in institutions, in intersections. A stable bridge, a reliable inn, a crossroads that remains calm. Trust follows consistent behavior. Trust as infrastructure. When trust fails, routes change. Trade reroutes. Information detours. People avoid places that once thrived. Trust collapse precedes material collapse.
Part 94. The world's resistance to simplification. Simplification is tempting. The world resists it. Why simple explanations fail. Simple explanations remove nuance. Nuance contains warning. Without warning, action becomes reckless. so the world undermines simplicity. Outcomes contradict assumptions. Complexity as protection. Layered understanding slows decisions. Slow decisions reduce error. This is not inefficiency, it is insurance. Part 95. Objects that are meant to be passed on. Some objects are designed to outlive their owners. Designed for continuity. Handles that fit many hands. Materials that age visibly. Mechanisms that reveal wear honestly. These objects communicate history. They teach future users how they were treated. Why personalization is minimal. Excess personalization limits transfer. Transferability ensures survival. Survival is the goal. Part 96. The culture of quiet correction. Correction happens gently. How behavior is adjusted. A path is blocked slightly. A tool is repositioned subtly. A schedule is shifted mildly. People notice, they adjust, no confrontation required. Why this works? Confrontation escalates. Escalation attracts attention. Attention destabilizes. Quiet correction preserves balance. Part 97. The acceptance of partial loss. Loss is expected. What is protected? People protect systems, not components. A bridge may be sacrificed to protect a route network. A building abandoned to preserve a district. Component loss prevents systemic collapse. Grieving without disruption. Grief is expressed, but contained. Life continues alongside mourning. This prevents emotional overload. Part 98. The transmission of warnings. Warnings travel carefully. Indirect warnings. A story told slightly differently. A route no longer recommended. A task quietly reassigned. These signals propagate without panic. Why explicit warnings are rare. Testing increases risk, so warnings are encoded. Part 99. The world as a learning partner. The world here is not hostile, it is responsive. Feedback loops. Action produces response. Response informs adjustment. Adjustment stabilizes interaction. Those who ignore feedback are corrected harshly. Those who listen are guided gently. Partnership, not mastery. The world does not submit, but it cooperates. Cooperation requires humility. Part 100. Continuation without destination. There is no final state, no completion, only continuation. Why this is sustainable. Goals conclude, processes persist. This world favors processes. They absorb error, they adapt, they endure.
Part 101. The discipline of leaving space. Space is not emptiness here. It is allowance. People leave margins in plans, pauses in speech, gaps in construction. These spaces absorb what cannot be predicted. Without them, pressure accumulates and releases elsewhere, often destructively. Why plans are intentionally incomplete. Blueprints include contingencies that are never filled in. Agreements reference conditions that may never arise. Schedules contain open intervals with no assigned task. These omissions are not oversights, they are buffers. Space as safety. Space allows adjustment without conflict. When something changes, there is room to move. Part 102. The subtle education of the body. The body learns before the mind does. Physical memory. People step more lightly near certain stones. They slow unconsciously at familiar thresholds. Hands hesitate before touching old surfaces. This is not fear, It is calibration stored in muscle. Why training is embodied. Rules can be forgotten, habits persist, so instruction focuses on repetition rather than explanation. Part 103. The social acceptance of limits. Limits are discussed openly, knowing what not to attempt. Communities agree on boundaries. Do not drain that marsh. Do not rebuild that tower. Do not clear that forest. The reasons are often complex. The agreement is simple. Limits as collective wisdom. Limits prevent costly experimentation. They preserve stability earned over time. Part 104. The world's preference for small gestures. Large gestures ripple. Small gestures settle. Incremental repair. One beam reinforced. One ritual adjusted. One habit altered. Each change tested quietly. Why this scales? Small actions combine. Their cumulative effect stabilizes more reliably than dramatic intervention. Part 105. The quiet archive of practice. Not all knowledge is written. Practice as archive. How something is done preserves information. A method repeated across generations encodes lessons without words. This archive cannot be burned. Why manuals are rare. Manuals freeze knowledge. Practice adapts. Adaptation keeps systems alive. Part 106. The ethics of timing. When matters more than what. Right action, wrong time. An action that stabilizes today may destabilize tomorrow. So timing is evaluated carefully. Signs are watched. Conditions weighed. Patience as precision. Waiting refines accuracy. It is not indecision. Part 107. The quiet redistribution of burden. No one carries everything. Load sharing. Tasks rotate. Responsibilities shift. Expertise circulates. This prevents exhaustion. Exhaustion leads to mistakes. Why centralization is avoided. Central points fail catastrophically. Distributed systems fail gradually. Gradual failure is manageable.
Part 108. The language of adjustment. Adjustment has its own vocabulary. Words that signal change. Later. Elsewhere. Not this season. These phrases communicate more than they say. They prepare people without alarming them. Why precision is softened. Hard precision invites challenge. Soft precision invites cooperation. Part 109. The social role of routine. Routine stabilizes emotion. Predictability as comfort. Regular meals. Fixed rest periods. Repeated tasks. These anchor people during uncertainty. Routine without rigidity. Routines adjust subtly over time. They evolve without breaking. Part 114. The world's quiet approval. Approval here is not praise. It is absence of resistance. How approval is felt. Things work smoothly. No complications arise. Paths remain open. This is the world saying, continue. Listening for resistance. When resistance appears, action pauses. Adjustment begins. Part 111. The habit of checking twice. Nothing important is done only once. Doors are checked again before nightfall. Seals are tested after the weather changes.
Agreements are revisited once conditions shift. This is not mistrust. It is respect for drift. Why redundancy is behavioral. People double-check not because failure is expected, but because change is constant. What worked yesterday may still work today, but only if it is confirmed. Confirmation keeps systems aligned. Checking as care. To check again is to remain present. Neglect begins when checking feels unnecessary. Part 112. The social skill of stepping back. Knowing when to step forward matters. Knowing when to step back matters more. Voluntary withdrawal. People leave roles before exhaustion sets in. They relinquish authority before judgment dulls. They hand off tasks before familiarity turns into blindness. This is not abandonment. It is maintenance of perspective. Why stepping back preserves trust. Power held too long accumulates distortion. Rotation keeps perception fresh. Part 113. The world's tolerance thresholds. Every place has limits. Thresholds that are learned. How many people can gather? How long activity can continue? How much change can occur at once? These limits are discovered through experience. Exceeding them produces response. Respecting thresholds. Communities adjust before thresholds are crossed. This prevents correction from becoming punishment. Part 115. The quiet transmission of skill. Peer learning. People learn by watching equals. This prevents authority bias. Mistakes are shared openly. Learning accelerates. Why hierarchies are soft. Rigid hierarchy slows adaptation. Soft hierarchy allows information to flow freely. Part 116. Tools that invite pause. Some tools slow their user deliberately. Designing for reflection. Handles shaped to require adjustment. Mechanisms that must be aligned carefully. Processes that cannot be rushed. These tools create moments of pause. Pause prevents error. Why speed is treated carefully. Speed collapses feedback loops. Collapsed feedback creates blind action. Blind action destabilizes systems. Part 116. The emotional value of familiar work. Familiar tasks calm the mind. Repetition as grounding. Daily chores anchor emotion. They remind people what remains stable. Stability supports decision-making. Why ritual labor persists. Not all labor is efficient. Some labor exists to maintain orientation. Part 117. The subtle markers of change. Change announces itself quietly. Early indicators. Different birdsong, altered echo, shifted shadows. These signs appear before major events. Those who notice early adjust gently. Why alarms are rare. Alarms escalate emotion. Escalation amplifies impact. Early response prevents alarm. Part 118. The practice of leaving things better than found. Improvement here is modest. Small enhancements. A smoother step. A clearer marker. A safer handhold. These changes accumulate. Avoiding overcorrection. Too much improvement disrupts balance. Balance matters more than optimization. Part 119. The world's quiet language of permission. Permission is not granted by decree. Signs of permission: ease of movement, absence of resistance, predictable outcomes. These indicate alignment. When permission is withdrawn, resistance increases. Unexpected events occur. Activities are reconsidered. Part 120. Living without urgency. Urgency narrows perception. Why calm pace is maintained. Calm allows context to remain visible. Context prevents error. Sustainable attention. Attention is conserved. It is applied where necessary, withdrawn when no longer useful. Part 121. The patience of surfaces. Surfaces matter more than they appear to. Stone worn smooth, wood polished by hands, metal dulled by weather. These surfaces record interaction. They remember how often they were touched, how carefully, how urgently. People here learn to read surfaces the way others read expressions. A surface that resists touch warns. A surface that welcomes it permits. Why new surfaces are treated gently. Fresh materials have not learned their place yet. They have not aligned with the surrounding systems. So new surfaces are tested slowly, used lightly, observed carefully. Only over time do they earn trust. Part 122. The social importance of repetition. Repetition is not redundancy, it is verification. Why tasks are repeated the same way. Consistency reveals deviation. When something changes, it becomes visible only against repetition. This allows early correction. Repetition as language. Doing something the same way communicates reliability. Others adjust around that reliability. Systems stabilize. Part 123. The quiet weight of schedules. Schedules are flexible, but they are respected. Why schedules exist? They synchronize people. Synchronization reduces friction. Reduced friction lowers stress on systems. When schedules shift, shifts are gradual. Abrupt changes create shock. Shock triggers response. So schedules slide gently. Part 124. The role of weathered objects. Objects that have endured are trusted. Why age signals reliability. If something survived long enough, it learned alignment. It adapted. It did not resist change. Passing down the durable. People inherit tools, not decorations. Durability carries knowledge. Part 125. The practice of minimal explanation. Explanations are brief. Why long explanations are rare. They fix interpretation. Fixed interpretation resists adjustment. Brief explanations leave room. Room allows adaptation. Teaching by example. Example demonstrates limits without enforcing them. Part 126. The world's sensitivity to intensity. Intensity concentrates effect. Why extremes are avoided. Extreme heat, extreme sound, extreme emotion. All draw attention. Attention destabilizes layered systems. So moderation prevails. Part 127. The social value of predictable behavior. Predictability reduces load. Why unpredictability is discouraged. Unpredictable actions require constant recalculation. Recalculation exhausts systems. So, predictability is kindness. Personal consistency. People act within known ranges.
This allows others to plan safely. Part 128. The quiet monitoring of change. Change is never ignored. How monitoring happens. Notes are mental. Markers are subtle. Comparisons are continuous. Monitoring is woven into daily life. Why formal reports are rare. Formalization delays response. Informal awareness adapts faster. Part 129. The world's preference for distributed attention. Attention is spread thinly. Why focus is shared. Single focus creates blind spots. Distributed attention catches anomalies early. Collective awareness. No one sees everything. Everyone sees something. Together, patterns emerge. Part 130. The long skill of staying oriented. Orientation is survival. Why disorientation is dangerous. Losing context leads to poor decisions. Context anchors action. Tools for orientation. Landmarks. Routines. Familiar faces. These stabilize perception. Final movement. The world that keeps its breath. There comes a moment, if one walks long enough through this world, when the need to understand begins to soften. Not because understanding is complete, but because it is no longer urgent. The land continues its quiet negotiations. Old stone settles. Forests adjust their borders by a few careful steps. Roads accept wear without complaint. Magic moves where it is allowed, rests where it is not invited. Nothing resolves, and yet nothing collapses. The lost civilizations are still here, not as ruins demanding remembrance, but as habits embedded into the shape of things. In the way people hesitate before acting, in the way they leave space between decisions, in the way care is repeated daily without ceremony. The precursors remain in balance points no one names. The elves remain in the patience of living things. The dwarves remain in structures that hold without asking why. Humans remain in adaptation. Imperfect, persistent, learning slowly. Each civilization failed at permanence. Together, they succeeded at continuity. This world does not ask to be healed. It asks to be listened to. It teaches that survival is not victory, but participation. That meaning does not arrive at the end of history, but accumulates quietly in the middle. That restraint is not weakness, and maintenance is not resignation. People wake. They work. They adjust. They leave things slightly better aligned than they found them. And that is enough. As night settles, there is no final lesson offered. Only a shared stillness. The fire burns low, but steady. The road remains open. The world keeps breathing, not waiting to be finished, just continuing.